My name is Tara Malone. I'm 32 years old, and for the past 9 years, I worked as a forensic accountant for the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit in Chicago. I've traced cartel money through 17 countries. I've sat across from men who would rather die than give up a bank account number. I've spent years learning how to follow money through the dark, through layers and layers of shadow until I found the thing people were trying to hide. None of that prepared me for what my own family did. I still remember the exact moment I found out. It was a Wednesday, early March, one of those Chicago mornings where the cold has this particular cruelty to it, like the city is deliberately trying to break you. I was sitting at my kitchen table in my apartment, still in my robe, mug of coffee going cold beside me. I wasn't even looking for anything. I was just reviewing my personal accounts before a long day at the office, routine, automatic, the kind of thing you do on autopilot, and then I saw the withdrawal, $47,000, gone, from the joint account my grandmother had set up for me before she died, the account that was supposed to be untouchable, the one she called my foundation money, the savings she'd built over 40 years of working double shifts as a nurse in Pittsburgh so that her granddaughter would never be desperate. I stared at the number. I refreshed the page. I closed the app and reopened it. The number didn't change. The transfer had gone to an LLC I didn't recognize, Westbridge Capital Consulting. I set my coffee down very carefully. I didn't panic, because I've been trained not to panic. But something cold settled into my chest that morning, something that didn't leave for a very long time. My older brother had access to that account. He'd been added years ago, back when I was deployed on a long undercover assignment and needed someone to handle things if something happened to me. His name was on it. I trusted him with it the way you trust a limb, without thinking, without question, because he was simply part of you. His name is Ryan. I need to tell you about Ryan before I tell you the rest, because without understanding him, none of this makes sense. Ryan is 4 years older than me. He's always been the version of success our parents understood. Local, visible, the kind of life you can photograph and frame. He married young, moved back to our hometown of Naperville, Illinois, started a contracting business, joined the Rotary Club. At every holiday dinner for the last decade, my mother would say things like, "Ryan's really built something," and I would nod and smile because I was proud of him. He was my brother. I loved him. What I didn't see, what none of us saw clearly enough, was how much pressure Ryan had been carrying. The business wasn't as solid as it looked. He'd borrowed heavily, made bad calls, taken on projects that fell apart. His wife, whose name I won't say here because I still feel something complicated when I think about her, had champagne taste and a way of spending money that Ryan could never quite match. And instead of asking for help, instead of being honest with anyone in our family about what was happening, Ryan started looking for another way. He found it in my account. Over the course of 14 months, while I was buried in a federal investigation that required 18-hour days and complete tunnel vision, Ryan transferred $112,000 out of the account my grandmother left me. He didn't do it in one dramatic move. He was careful. Small amounts at first, just under $10,000 to stay beneath reporting thresholds, which, if you know anything about forensic accounting, you'd recognize immediately as a structured withdrawal strategy. He'd learned that from somewhere, maybe from watching me. I don't know. That thought has its own particular sting. The money went to Westbridge Capital Consulting, which was an LLC registered in Delaware under the name of a friend of his. Someone who existed on paper just enough to be useful. From there, it paid for his business debts, a vacation home deposit up in Wisconsin, and what I later found out were separate credit card balances his wife didn't know about either. He stole from our grandmother's memory to hide his failures from his wife, and when I found out, my parents told me to let it go. I'm going to say that again, because it matters. My parents told me to let it go. My mother called me the night I confronted Ryan. I had called her first, shaking, still not fully believing what I was looking at, needing to hear something that would make this make sense. And she listened, and when I finished, she said, "Tara, he's your brother. He's struggling. You make good money. You can recover from this. He can't." I sat on my bathroom floor after that call. The tile was cold. The apartment was very quiet. And I understood something I hadn't let myself understand before. In my family's eyes, I had always been the one who could take it. I was the one who left, who built a life that looked different from theirs, who didn't need what they needed. I was capable, therefore I was expendable. My sacrifice didn't count. My grandmother's gift to me didn't count. What counted was keeping the peace, keeping Ryan's marriage intact, keeping the family portrait looking the way everyone wanted it to look. I'd been the afterthought my whole life. I just hadn't known it. I took 2 weeks of personal leave. I told my supervisor it was a family matter, which was technically true in the worst possible way. And then I did the only thing I know how to do when I'm falling apart. I worked. I pulled every document connected to that account going back 3 years. Bank records, transfer logs, IP addresses, the registration paperwork for Westbridge Capital. I'm good at this. I've done it professionally for nearly a decade. But doing it on your own brother feels like operating on yourself without anesthesia. You know exactly what you're looking at. You know how bad it is. And you keep going anyway because stopping hurts more. By the end of the first week, I had a spreadsheet. Clean, precise, color-coded by transfer date and destination. $112,000, 14 months, 31 separate transactions, every one of them structured to avoid automated flags. He knew what he was doing, or someone helped him know that someone turned out to be a financial advisor named Greg, someone Ryan had been seeing for 2 years, a man who had his own history of complaints filed with FINRA, which is the regulatory body that oversees financial advisors, though nothing had ever gone to prosecution. When I found Greg's name attached to Westbridge's registered agent, I cross-referenced him against Ryan's phone records that I had pulled through a legal process I won't detail here. 12 calls in the 2 months before the first transfer. Greg wasn't just advising Ryan on investments. He was showing him how to move money without getting caught. The problem was, Ryan had made one mistake. One, he had transferred $800 from the account to pay for something personal, a car repair, something small and careless, and that transfer had gone directly to a vendor account that was registered in Ryan's real name. It was a crack, a tiny one, but for someone who does what I do, a crack is all you need. I built the full picture. I documented everything. And then I called an attorney. Her name is Denise, and she's the kind of person who looks at a fraud case the way a surgeon looks at a body. Calm, systematic, not personally invested in whether what she finds is ugly. She looked at my documentation for 2 hours, and then she looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "This is prosecutable. Federal level. Are you ready for what that means?" I told her yes. I wasn't entirely sure I was telling the truth, but I said it anyway. My family found out I had hired an attorney on a Thursday evening. Ryan called me. His voice was different than I'd ever heard it. Not angry, not defensive, just very, very quiet. "Tara," he said, "can we talk about this?" I let the silence stretch for a long moment. Then I said, "There's nothing to talk about, Ryan. You made your choices. Now there are consequences." He called my mother after that. My mother called me at 11:30 at night. She was crying in a way that made me feel 11 years old again, guilty for things I hadn't done. She said my father was devastated. She said this would destroy the family. She said that she couldn't understand why I was doing this, why I couldn't just let the lawyers handle it quietly, why I had to make it into something. I remember holding the phone away from my ear for a moment, looking at my ceiling, taking a breath. "Mom," I said, when I brought it back, "he stole Grandma's money. Her money. The money she saved for me. Do you understand that?" A pause. "Then she would have wanted peace, Tara. She always wanted peace in this family. I hung up after that. Gently. I didn't slam the phone, didn't say anything sharp. I just ended the call and sat in the silence and understood that I was completely alone in this. That was the worst part. Not the money. Not even the betrayal. The loneliness of having the people who were supposed to be on your side look at the evidence you'd gathered, understand what it meant, and still choose the person who hurt you. I stopped going to family dinners. I stopped answering my mother's texts during that stretch. I ran every morning at 5 a.m. because I needed something that felt like control. I made my coffee, went to work, came home, and worked on the case. That was my life for 3 months. Denise filed the civil suit first. Fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, unjust enrichment. The numbers were documented down to the last dollar. Ryan's attorney filed a response that was honestly almost impressive in how audacious it was. He claimed that the transfers had been made with my implicit consent, that I had been aware of his business difficulties, that the money had been intended as a loan, which I had agreed to verbally. I had never agreed to anything. There was no loan conversation. There was no anything. He simply took the money and hoped I wouldn't look. I looked. The civil hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in November. I remember getting dressed that morning in a way I hadn't dressed in a long time. Not the professional but casual look I usually default to, but something deliberate. Dark blazer, the good one I wear when I testify, hair back. I looked at myself in the mirror for a moment and I thought, you've walked into rooms where people wanted to intimidate you your whole career. This is just another room. Ryan was already seated when I arrived. Him and his attorney on one side, Denise and me on the other. He was wearing a suit I didn't recognize. His wife wasn't there, which surprised me. My parents were seated in the gallery. My mother looked like she'd been crying. My father had his jaw set in that way he always does when he's decided something is beneath him to feel. Ryan looked at me once when I sat down, just once. And the look on his face wasn't anger, and it wasn't guilt. It was something smaller and sadder than either of those things. It looked like someone who had finally stopped pretending that everything was fine. Ryan's attorney went first. He was polished in the way that attorneys who specialize in making wrongdoing look like misunderstanding are polished. He used words like turbulent financial period and informal family arrangement and good faith communication breakdown. He spoke for 20 minutes. He cited no documentation, because he had no documentation, because there was none to cite. Then Denise stood up. She didn't make a speech. She doesn't do that. She simply said, Your Honor, we've prepared a financial exhibit documenting 31 separate transfers totaling $112,000, each structured to remain beneath federal reporting thresholds. We'd like to submit this to the court, along with the documentation of the LLC used as an intermediary, the regulatory history of the financial advisor involved, and the direct link between one transfer and my client's brother's personal vendor account. She slid the binder across to the clerk. I watched the judge open it. He's a careful man, methodical, the kind of judge who reads what's in front of him rather than skimming. He read for a while. The courtroom was very quiet. Ryan's attorney whispered something. Ryan didn't respond. The judge looked up. He looked at Ryan's attorney. He looked at Ryan. Then he looked at me. He said, I'm going to need a short recess. In the hallway, during the recess, my mother found me by the water fountain. She put her hand on my arm and said, Tara, please, is there any way to... I looked at her hand on my arm. I looked at her face, which I have loved my whole life, which I still love even now, in the complicated way you love people who have failed you. No, I said, there isn't. She dropped her hand. She went back inside. There isn't. She dropped her hand. She went back inside. The recess lasted 22 minutes. When we returned, the judge made a preliminary ruling. Given the documentation submitted, the financial activity in question demonstrated clear, repeated, intentional structuring. He was referring the matter to the U.S. Attorney's Office for potential criminal review. The civil case would proceed, and he was ordering an immediate freeze on Westbridge Capital Consulting's accounts, pending further review. Ryan made a sound I'd never heard from him before. Not words, just a sound. His wife, it turned out, found out everything that day. Not through him, through the court documents that became public record. She called me 2 weeks later, from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. She was crying. She said she hadn't known. She said she was so sorry. She said she didn't know what to do. I believed her. I still do. She was a victim of this too, in her own way, even if her spending had been one of the pressures that pushed Ryan toward the choice he made. I told her I was sorry it happened to her. I told her I hoped she'd be okay. I meant both things. Greg, the financial advisor, became the subject of a separate regulatory complaint that I filed with FINRA and forwarded to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, my own former unit, which was strange in a way I don't quite have words for. Standing on the other side of that, being complainant instead of the investigator, Ryan ultimately pleaded guilty to 2 counts of wire fraud in the federal case. He received 30 months of probation, was ordered to repay the full $112,000, and lost his contractor's license for 3 years. He didn't go to prison. I want to be honest that I had complicated feelings about that. Part of me felt the sentence was light. Part of me sat alone in my apartment the night the plea was entered and thought about the fort we used to build in our backyard when we were kids. How he always let me choose the flag, and I felt something I didn't have a clean name for. My parents were not charged with anything. They hadn't committed a crime. But my mother was furious with me, is still furious with me, in the way that people who are ashamed of themselves sometimes turn that shame outward. My father called me once about a month after the plea. He said, "I hope you're satisfied." I said no, I'm not satisfied. Satisfaction would mean this hadn't happened. He didn't call again. I went back to work. Slowly, then all at once. A colleague of mine at the unit, a woman I'll call my friend because that's what she's become over these past 2 years, started something after she heard pieces of my story. Not the full thing, just enough. She started connecting me to other people, mostly women, mostly younger, who had experienced financial fraud from within their own families, people who had been told to let it go, people who didn't know what documentation to keep, what institutions to contact, what their actual options were. I started doing pro bono consultations, an hour on the phone, sometimes 2, walking people through what I saw in their records, explaining what was and wasn't provable, helping them understand they weren't imagining things and they weren't powerless. I'm not an attorney. I'm careful to say that, but I know how money moves, and I know how to read what it's saying, and sometimes that's exactly what someone needs. I think about my grandmother a lot doing this work. She was a practical woman, not sentimental, the kind of person who showed love through action rather than words. She worked 40 years to give me a foundation. What Ryan took wasn't just money, it was the physical evidence of her care for me, the embodied version of all those double shifts. I got the money back. Most of it through the civil judgment and the restitution order. It took 18 months and it's sitting in a new account now, one that no one else has access to. But that's not the point. The point is that it happened, and that when it did, my family's instinct was to protect the person who caused the harm, rather than the person who experienced it. That's the thing I still carry. Not the loss of the money, but the clarity of that moment. The understanding that I had been, in some essential way, always on my own. There's a thing that happens after you go through something like this. A kind of resorting. You look at your life and you see very clearly what's real and what was performance, what's sustaining and what was habit. Some relationships that I thought were peripheral turned out to be load-bearing. Some that I thought were central turned out to be furniture, decorative, interchangeable, not actually holding anything up. I moved apartments that spring, smaller place, but with a window that looks out over the lake. In the mornings before work, I sit with my coffee and watch the light come up over the water, and I think about all the things I survived that I didn't think I would survive. And I think about the people I've been able to help by surviving them. Ryan and I don't speak. I don't know if we will again. Some days that feels like grief, and some days it feels like relief, and most days it feels like both at the same time, layered on top of each other the way complicated things are. My mother sent me a card last Christmas. It had a winter scene on the front, a covered bridge in the snow, very neutral. Inside she'd written, "I hope you're well. I think about you." She signed it with her first name, which was new. I put it on my refrigerator. I still don't know what that means for either of us, but I left it there. What I know is this: the money my grandmother saved was real. The work she did to save it was real. The care she had for me was real. And no one gets to erase those things, not by transferring them through a shell company, not by asking me to keep quiet, not by telling me that the family's comfort matters more than my grandmother's legacy and my own life. I've sat across from a lot of liars in my career. People who built elaborate systems to hide what they were doing, who told themselves stories about why it wasn't really wrong, who believed that if they didn't get caught, the harm didn't count. What I've learned is that the systems always have a crack. Always. Because people who are hiding something are always, underneath it, aware that they're hiding it. And that awareness creates slippage. A careless transfer. A name in the metadata. A car repaired from the wrong account. You just have to be willing to look. To anyone watching this who has felt the particular loneliness of having your family close ranks around the person who hurt you, I want you to know something. That loneliness is real. What you experienced is real. You are not too sensitive or too difficult or too unforgiving. You are someone who deserved better than what you got. And you are allowed to say so. I'm still saying so. And I don't plan to stop. People ask me sometimes if I regret it. Reporting my own brother. Putting his name in federal documents. Sitting across a courtroom from my mother's wet eyes and my father's locked jaw and still handing that binder over anyway. And I always take a second before I answer, because the honest answer is complicated. No, I don't regret it, but I carry it. Here's what I've come to understand about the whole thing, not as a lesson I plan to learn, but as something that settled into me slowly over the months after it was over. What Ryan did wasn't random. It wasn't some explosion of cruelty that came from nowhere. It was the result of a long accumulated pressure, choices made and avoided, truth suppressed, debts hidden, a version of himself he couldn't maintain and couldn't let go of. And instead of facing any of it, he reached for the easiest exit he could find, which was me, which was money I couldn't see from where I was standing. That's how it usually works in my experience. The person who gets hurt in these situations isn't always the one who was targeted out of malice. Sometimes they're just the one who looked safe, the one who seemed like they could absorb it. And Ryan had been told his whole life, in ways both direct and subtle, that I was the capable one, the one who left and figured it out, the one who didn't need. So when he needed something he couldn't ask for, honestly, his mind went there, not because he hated me, because he had decided somewhere underneath all of it that I didn't count quite as much. That's the thing that took me the longest to sit with, not the theft. The math he must have done in his head, the quiet calculation that my grandmother's savings for me were available, somehow in a way they wouldn't have been if they belonged to someone else in the family. Tracing his transactions line by line, I kept thinking about what it takes to build that kind of rationalization. You don't steal from your sister in one dramatic decision. You do it in 31 small ones. You tell yourself a story each time. It's temporary. She'll never notice. I'll pay it back. It's basically a loan, and each time the story holds just long enough for you to make the transfer, and then you need a slightly bigger story for the next one and the one after that. That's how people end up places they never imagined going, not through one catastrophic moral failure, but through a series of small surrenders to the easier version of themselves. I think about my grandmother when I think about all of this. She didn't save that money as a statement or a symbol. She saved it the way practical women of her generation saved things. Quietly, consistently, without announcing it. Double shifts. Decades. A foundation, she called it. She understood something that I didn't fully understand until this happened. That financial security is a form of dignity. That having something set aside, something no one can touch, means you have choices. It means you can't be made desperate by circumstance. She wanted that for me. And someone took it, and the people who raised both of us said let it go. I let go of a lot of things in the year after the plea was entered. I let go of the version of my family I had believed in. I let go of the idea that love, on its own, is protection. I let go of the particular loneliness of being the capable one. Because I don't want to be the capable one anymore in that way. The one whose pain is manageable, whose losses are recoverable, whose silence is convenient. What I kept was simpler. The work, the discipline of looking at something clearly even when you don't want to see it. The knowledge that I did not make myself small when it was easier to be small. I kept going, and I kept my grandmother's money, and I kept the part of myself that knows what it's worth to tell the truth, even when every person in the room wishes you wouldn't. That's enough. Some days it's more than enough.